The lights of the stadium shimmered like a field of stars as thousands of fans surged toward the stage, their faces glowing beneath the giant screens that towered above them. It was one of those nights that hummed with electricity long before the show even began, the kind of night that every person in the venue would one day swear they knew was legendary even before the first note. When the band slid into their opening riff and the fog burst across the platform, the crowd erupted in a single thunderous wave. Michael Jackson stepped onto the stage with the grace of someone who belonged there more than anywhere else in the world. And the screams rose so loudly that it felt as if the stadium itself had begun to vibrate. From the front rows to the furthest banners fluttering against the upper railings, everyone felt suspended in the kind of collective joy that only a live concert could summon. And yet, somewhere in that sea of cheering, dancing, ecstatic humanity, somewhere down near the left side of the stage barricade, a small child had begun to cry. Not the soft, overwhelmed kind of crying that one might expect from a young fan swept up in emotion, but the trembling, helpless sobs of someone suddenly lost inside a world too loud, too enormous, too dazzling. The child couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, tiny in a crowd of adults all leaning forward, striving for a closer glimpse of the singer they had waited months, maybe years, to see. The sound of the child's crying was swallowed by the amplified beats echoing through the venue, unseen and unheard by anyone but a handful of people nearby, until the most unexpected thing happened. During a moment between lyrics, a flicker of motion caught Michael's eye. Fans were waving, reaching, crying tears of joy as always, but something in the movement of the crowd near the barricade pulled his attention. He stepped forward slightly, his body still poised in rhythm, but his gaze sharpening as he scanned the faces at the front. Thousands of eyes followed his, trying to understand what he had seen. Then, without warning, the music cut. The band, attuned to his slightest cue, dropped the sound into an abrupt silence that fell over the stadium like a soft blanket. The crowd murmured in confusion, not angry, not disappointed, just startled. A sudden hush swept outward as if the entire world paused mid-breath. Michael lowered his microphone, his brow pinching with concern. He took another step toward the front edge of the stage, leaning forward slightly as though trying to isolate a single voice among thousands. And then he saw the child, small shoulders shaking, little hands clutching the barricade, as though to hold onto something stable amid the chaos. The child's face was buried in tears, and even from where he stood, Michael could feel the fear radiating off of them. Without thinking, without hesitation, he raised his hand gently, a signal his security team knew well. The guards moved instantly, parting the crowd just enough to reach the young fan. The audience watched in stunned silence as the child was lifted carefully over the barricade by security and brought toward the edge of the stage. Michael gave a soft nod, stepping back slightly to give space, his face softening into an expression that fans recognized from countless moments of tenderness he had shown toward children over the years. As the child approached, the stadium lights dimmed almost instinctively, the spotlight narrowing until it cast a warm glow across Michael and the trembling figure being escorted toward him. There was no script for this, no rehearsed section of the show that anticipated a moment like this. It unfolded with the surreal, effortless sincerity that only real compassion can create. When the guards gently placed the child onto the stage, Michael knelt down slowly so he was at their eye level. The child's breath trembled, hiccuping between sobs, tiny palms rubbing tear-streaked cheeks. Michael extended his hand, not forcefully, not hurriedly, but like an invitation to safety. The child hesitated for only a moment before placing their small hand into his. Michael smiled softly, brushing a tear from the child's face with the back of his other hand. And then he spoke, his voice low and tender, amplified just enough for the audience to hear but gentle enough that it felt like it belonged only to the child. He asked if they were okay, if the crowd had scared them, if they felt lost, overwhelmed, or simply too small among so many grown-ups swaying and shouting. The child shook their head slowly, trying to form words, but failing as another wave of tears rolled down their cheeks. Michael reached out and wrapped his arms around the child, holding them close in a protective embrace that contrasted beautifully with the grandeur of the stage around them. There was no music, no spectacle, no choreography, just a quiet moment of pure humanity between one of the most famous people in the world and a single frightened child. The crowd, far from impatient, stood utterly still. Many fans placed their hands over their hearts. Others wiped at eyes already glistening with tears. People who had traveled across continents to see a once in a lifetime performance now watched something even rarer, a glimpse of a gentle, earnest soul beneath the dazzling superstar they had come to celebrate. After holding the child for a long moment, Michael slowly stood while keeping one comforting arm around their shoulders. He whispered something to the crew at the side of the stage. No one knew what he said, but within seconds a small chair and a bottle of water appeared. Michael led the child to the chair, kneeling next to them and staying close until the trembling eased. He spoke softly, reassuringly, telling them they were safe, that they didn't need to be afraid of anything. He asked their name, coaxed a fragile smile out of them, and made the entire stadium feel like witnesses to a private, sacred exchange. When the child had calmed enough to look around without fear, Michael gave them a playful little wink. The crowd erupted into soft applause, not the roaring kind that normally followed his biggest hits, but the warm, appreciative kind reserved for tender acts of kindness. Michael held up his hand, signaling for quiet again. He turned toward the child and asked gently if they wanted to stay with him on stage for a while. Their tiny nod was almost imperceptible, but he saw it and smiled. Carefully he picked them up, not dramatically, but securely, the way a parent might pick up a child who has just stopped crying after a long tantrum. The child clung to him instinctively, their arms circling his neck, their small face pressing lightly into the sequins of his jacket. With the child still in his arms, Michael walked back toward the center of the stage. He turned slightly toward the band, giving a subtle signal. The music swelled back to life, but now with a softer introduction, something warm and gentle. The opening chords of one of his more heartfelt songs echoed through the venue, and the moment transformed. The crowd erupted in cheers, realizing that they were about to witness a once-in-a-lifetime performance, one in which Michael Jackson, global icon, would sing while holding a small child who only minutes earlier had been frightened and lost. As he began to sing, the child nestled safely against him, calming fully as the melody filled the air. Michael's voice floated across the stadium with a tenderness that seemed amplified by the moment. He didn't perform the dance routine. He didn't move across the stage the way he usually did. Instead, he held the child with steady arms, rocking them gently as he sang directly to them, as if the thousands of fans around them had momentarily vanished. The spotlight settled softly on the pair, casting them in a golden glow, while the rest of the stage darkened into a vignette that made them appear almost suspended in a bubble of compassion. The crowd watched in awe, tears falling without shame, phones forgotten, hands pressed to faces or reaching outward as if to touch the fragile beauty of what they were seeing. For those few minutes, the concert was no longer a spectacle of dazzling choreography or high-powered vocals. It was a lullaby delivered to a single child, and, by extension, to everyone watching. The song carried a different weight that night, infused with a sincerity that could never be rehearsed or replicated. It was one of those moments when an artist's humanity outshines even their greatest artistry. When the song ended, Michael kissed the child gently on the forehead, whispering something soft and reassuring before handing them to a member of the crew who had come to escort them backstage. As the child was carried off, they waved shyly at the crowd. The entire stadium responded with a wave of applause so warm and mighty that it seemed to lift the child's spirit right back into joy. Michael watched them go, his eyes lingering a moment longer, as though he needed to be certain they were truly all right. Then he turned back to the audience, exhaled softly, and raised the microphone once more. He thanked the fans for their patience, for their kindness, and for understanding that sometimes a small soul needs comfort more than a performance needs continuity. The crowd roared, and he smiled that shy, iconic smile that always pulled at the heartstrings of anyone who saw it. When the next song began, the energy surged back to life, but something had changed in the atmosphere. The night no longer felt like a simple concert. It felt like a shared memory, a moment of collective humanity that everyone present would recount for years, even decades. As the night continued, Michael performed with the same precision and fire that had made him a legend, but there was an added warmth in his movements, a gentleness hovering beneath the dynamism, as though that small interruption had reminded everyone, including him, what music and connection were truly about. Fans danced with renewed spirit, shouting the lyrics even louder, their hearts buoyed by the knowledge that kindness had taken center stage that night, even amid the spectacle of pop history. Backstage, the child was reunited with a parent or guardian who had been frantically searching for them. The crew explained gently what had happened, reassuring them that the child had been safe, comforted, and cared for. The parents' relief washed over them like a tidal wave, and they embraced their child tightly, thanking the crew and repeating that they couldn't believe Michael had stopped everything, for their little one. The child's eyes were still red from crying, but now they sparkled with the kind of wonder that only a magical moment of pure kindness can create. Word of the event spread quickly through the crowd as people left the stadium later that night. Fans repeated the story to one another, shaking their heads in awe at what they had witnessed. Some said they had recorded it. Others missed the footage because they were too stunned or too moved to lift their phones. But it didn't matter. The moment had been imprinted into the memories of everyone there. It became part of the lore of that tour, whispered in fan communities, replayed in anecdotes, immortalized in hearts. For the child, the memory would linger far beyond the evening. Years later, they would tell the story to friends, recalling with amazement how the music had stopped, how the lights dimmed, and how one of the most famous people on earth had made them feel like the only person who mattered in a crowd of thousands. They would describe the warmth of his embrace, the softness in his voice, the gentleness in his eyes. It would be a memory that shaped their understanding of compassion, an unforgettable reminder that kindness often shines brightest in the moments least expected. As for Michael, he would step onto countless stages after that night, performing with the same unmatched passion and artistry that defined his career. But those who knew him well would say that nights like that one, nights when he could reach out directly to a child, comfort someone vulnerable, or show a moment of compassion, were the moments that mattered most to him. Fame, applause, awards, and record Breaking performances were extraordinary, but touching someone's life in a real, human way was something far deeper. It was something eternal. People often talk about defining moments in an artist's career. Moments when the world sees not just the performer, but the person behind the spotlight. That night was one of those rare moments. It captured the gentle spirit of someone whose love for children and for humanity was as much a part of his legacy as his voice, his dancing, or his groundbreaking music videos. It revealed something pure and simple, that even amid a sea of fans, amid the thunder of applause and the glare of lights, Michael Jackson could still hear the quiet cry of one frightened child, and he cared enough to stop everything. Fans would continue to talk about it for decades, retelling the story to new generations who discovered his music long after he was gone. They would speak of the way he knelt beside the child, the way he held them, the way he turned a massive concert into a tender lullaby. They would describe how the stadium fell silent, how thousands of hearts softened at once, how the moment felt suspended in time. And every person who heard the story would say the same thing, that it wasn't just a moment of kindness. It was a moment of humanity that transcended fame, that captured the very essence of who he was when no cameras, no choreography, no spotlight demanded it. In the end, that single act became larger than the show itself. It became a symbol, reminder that greatness isn't measured solely by talent or success, but by empathy, by compassion, by the willingness to care even when no one expects you to. It showed that a true icon is someone who sees the humanity in every person, even in the smallest, quietest voice in the crowd. And so, when people remember that night, not because of the setlist, not because of the record breaking attendance, but because Michael Jackson stopped an entire concert for one crying child, they remember something far more powerful than any performance. They remember a moment when kindness took center stage. They remember the silence that fell over thousands. They remember the warmth of a simple embrace. They remember the way a frightened child became, for a moment, the most important person in the world. They remember love in its purest, simplest form, and that is a legacy far more lasting than any song could ever be.